Michael Wolfe was found guilty of killing Frank Fritz in this court. As soon as the judge announced the verdict, all eyes were on Mike Wolfe. He blinked slowly and then his knees gave out. When medics arrived, they found Mike Wolfe dead. For more than a decade, they had been the dynamic duo of the TV show American Pickers. While traveling across the United States to look for antiques, there was fierce competition behind the smooth banter and tours of nostalgic, packed warehouses. There was also an undercurrent of power struggles that slowly built up into a raging fire. Was this a perfect crime or was it planned? How did Mike Wolfe kill his close friend Fritz in secret? This is the story of how Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz reached the heights of fame, only for it to end in a heartbreaking crime. Was Frank Fritz's death a stroke tragedy, or Frank Fritz's death was first reported as the tragic result of a crippling stroke? This was shocking news for his fans, but not completely unexpected. He had been off the show for years, dealing with health problems like weight gain and depression. His silence after leaving American Pickers was seen as an effort to heal emotional wounds, but it turned out that he wasn't really trying to heal. He was running away from something or someone. When news of Frank's sudden death at home spread, people were shocked and deeply saddened. Frank was remembered as the heart of the show, a rough-around, the edges but lovable man who was the perfect balance to Mike Wolfe's smooth talk and charm. But about 6 weeks after the funeral, a quiet investigation began in Iowa. It started with a coroner finding traces of poison in Frank's autopsy report. He had lethal levels of fentanyl in his system. This wasn't proof of foul play by itself, but it was a red flag. Because fentanyl is a strong drug that is often prescribed for pain after a stroke. Frank did not have a prescription for it, had never used it before, and didn't seem to have any way to get it. In fact, people close to him said he was even afraid of it. The strange signs could not be ignored, and the police called the DA and then the FBI. What started as a normal autopsy quickly turned into a major investigation. They got phone records, GPS data, emails, and even deleted text messages. People outside of the show saw Mike Wolfe as the face of the brand, a visionary businessman who made treasure hunting fun. But those who worked behind the scenes saw him as a completely different person, a controlling, calculating man obsessed with ownership and profit, especially in the years after Frank left the show. The more the investigation went on, the stranger things got. Mike Wolfe was accused of filing for the trademark of Frank Fritz's name just weeks after he died. He had secretly tried to buy out. The most damning evidence was that he was seen near Frank's house on a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera the night prosecutors thought the fentanyl was given. No one wanted to believe it. How could Mike Wolfe, the charming face of Americana, be accused of killing the man he used to call his brother? It seemed impossible, but the evidence didn't lie, and when the trial started, it became a must-see reality show, a dark drama that people all over the country watched. Seeing layer after layer of lies come off to reveal a horrible truth. Mike Wolfe was accused of betraying Frank and stealing his entire legacy, as well as of cruelly poisoning his best friend. He now faces a life sentence. His cruel death in front of the justice system, which is supposed to keep the peace, marks the end of a dark chapter. But this story doesn't end with that shocking ending. It includes everything that happened before it. Before the trial for murder, there was a friendship between Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe that seemed unbreakable. What broke their seemingly unbreakable bond, and how did Mike Wolfe end up killing his best friend? Let's take a look back at how these two friends became famous. Two golden days of American Pickers in the early 2000s. Before reality TV shows like Car Chase, Cooking Out, and Dating, Mike Wolfe had a vision. It wasn't flashy or glamorous, but it was very real. Wolfe wasn't a TV producer, an actor, or backed by a major media company. What he did have was a strong desire to find old treasures and a lot of persistence. He had been a picker for most of his life, going through small towns and knocking on doors to see if anyone had anything they were willing to sell. Sometimes he found valuable things, but most of the time he found junk. That didn't stop him. He had an idea for a show that would show the thrill of the hunt, the excitement of the negotiations, the allure of discoveries, and the special bond between an item and its owner. Then Frank Fritz came along. Frank was very different from Mike in many ways. Mike was outgoing, charismatic, and always full of energy. Frank was quieter, more reserved. He was the more technical one with a deep love. He was more interested in the small details than the big picture. The two had known each other since high school, but their adult lives had gone in different directions. Frank worked as a firefighter and safety inspector for many years before becoming an antiques dealer full-time. When Mike needed someone to help him make his dream come true, Frank was the perfect choice, not because they were alike, but because they were complemented each other. In 2009, after years of hard work, Mike Wolfe's idea was finally approved by the History Channel. The show was just two men in a truck traveling across the back roads of America, looking for valuable discarded items. It struck a chord. The first season of American Pickers premiered to record, breaking viewership, attracting people who love antiques as well as those who enjoy Mike's good negotiating skills and keen eye for Frank's deep knowledge of collectibles made the show more real. But the show wasn't just about picking. It was about the people. Each episode was full of touching personal stories about elderly people and couples proudly showing off treasures from their past. There were also eccentric collectors willing to lead viewers through mazes of garages and barns full of American history's remnants. There was laughter, there was tears, and the show never made fun of these people. Instead, it respected them, and that respect became a trademark of the show. As American Pickers became more popular, so did its stars, Mike and Frank. They quickly became well-known, going to events across the country to sign autographs and even opening stores based on their finds. Fans of the show would travel to Mike's antique archaeology stores in Iowa and Nashville. But success came with a price. The natural balance in their relationship started to break down. Mike Wolfe slowly became the face of the brand, getting more comfortable with interviews, doing more business, and taking over more backstage duties. He became the executive producer in charge of brand deals and the main negotiator for sales contracts and business opportunities. Frank, who was still portrayed as an equal on screen, started to feel the growing gap between the two. 3 silent betrayals of power and greed those close to the pair began to notice, to reveal the secrets behind the scenes where tensions slowly built up until they finally erupted. Several sources say Frank felt increasingly ignored. Their ideas were ignored, their contributions were downplayed, and Frank's value was diminished. Some former crew members say Mike started to act as though the show was his own property instead of a collaborative effort. The problem wasn't just ego, it was power dynamics. Mike owned Antique Archaeology and ran the production company. Fans started noticing strange things by season 10. Frank seemed quieter. His screen time had drastically decreased, and he didn't show up in as many promos or interviews. There were rumors of health problems and internal conflict. The show never directly addressed these issues, but social media was abuzz with rumors. Then it was announced that Frank wouldn't be returning. The official reason was that he needed a medical leave of absence after he was having back surgery and needed time to recover. The statements were carefully worded and didn't promise any specifics. Mike's response was surprisingly short. Fans were expecting a heartfelt tribute, a recognition of years of friendship and filming together, but all they got were a few cold lines. Mike posted a few words on Instagram wishing Frank the best, but the tone was distant and indifferent, as if business was going on without him, and it did. A new co-host was added and viewership dropped. Even though Frank wasn't on the show, Mike kept doing interviews and selling merchandise. But behind the scenes, Frank was having a hard time. His friends told him that he felt abandoned by both the show and Mike. He thought he deserved better treatment because, in his mind, he wasn't just a co-host, he was a co-creator. He had spent years building the show's loyal fan base, and now he was being pushed out. He started drinking again and stopped. Going to public events, gaining weight, and his mood getting worse. Eventually he had a stroke, which led to his death. What happened between them is still a mystery. Some say it was ego, others say it was money, and still others say there was a deeper betrayal that the audience never saw. Whatever the reason, the friendship that built American Pickers was broken. And when Frank died, Mike's actions made things even stranger. He didn't go to the funeral, didn't post a tribute, and didn't even people hadn't heard about Frank's death for a few days. But the police were already quietly looking into it. A toxicology report showed that Frank had lethal levels of fentanyl in his system, a drug that can't be obtained without a prescription. This raised a lot of questions, like who had access to Frank and would benefit from his death, and what Mike Wolfe was doing near Frank's house the night before he was found unconscious. Getting famous is one thing, but staying famous is quite another. For Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz, fame came like when American Pickers became a huge hit. Business took center stage. It wasn't just about the thrill of finding a 1930s motorcycle under a tarp in rural Tennessee, or an old oil sign hidden in a forgotten barn. Now it was all about contracts, profit percentages, licensing deals, and intellectual property. In this world, Mike Wolfe did well while Frank struggled to keep up. It all started with small changes, like how much screen time each host got and how the show was sung. They decided the narration, how often they appeared, promotional materials, and which scenes were kept in the editing process. Wall quietly increased his power by hiring a team of agents, lawyers, and public relations experts. He started trademarking and refining exclusive phrases related to the antique archaeology industry and the brand, and he started working on side projects. Frank Fritz, on the other hand, had very different goals. He just wanted to live a simple life, quietly going on TV and meeting fans. Around season 6, close friends noticed a big change in the tone of their conversations. Another member of the production team remembers an event from season 8. The whole crew went to Alabama to film at an old man's classic car lot who had served in the Korean War. Frank connected with the man by telling him stories about collecting gas station memorabilia, and they had a warm, heartfelt conversation on camera. However, when the episode aired, that part was heavily edited out and replaced with more footage of Mike closing deals. Frank was angry and felt like he had been erased. Other cast members, crew members, shop owners, experts, and even guest pickers noticed a pattern. Their scenes were often cut or removed altogether unless they directly improved Wolfe's image. On top of that, Mike wanted to be the hero in every story. Over time, this obsession spread to every part of the American Picker brand. He trademarked common phrases used on the show to protect the antiques, and made sure that all merchandise sales went through his LLC. Even the official social media accounts were managed by his team, not the network. He hired publicists to help him shape his public image, and any press interview had to be approved by his team first. A former network executive who worked on the early seasons said that Wolfe often used his fame against others. He knew the network needed him and often threatened to leave if things didn't go his way. For the press, he's a pushover, but behind closed doors, he's a champion. Frank Fritz noticed these changes. He started to act irritable on set. He often left after arguments and sometimes refused to promote episodes because he didn't like how he was being portrayed. He thought Mike was being treated like the only star, while he was only playing a supporting role. Production staff also noticed that there wasn't any spontaneous laughter between the two of them, which had been a sign of real friendship. Now that they weren't on camera, they didn't talk much unless they had to. The truck, which used to be full of laughter and small town life chatter, had turned into a silent ride. Frank often drove alone in his own car while Mike built his own empire. He bought land in Tennessee and Iowa, expanded the antique archaeology stores, and made them tourist attractions. People waited in line for hours just to see Mike's office or take a picture of it. Along with the famous truck, T-shirts, mugs, posters, and even signed crowbars sold like crazy as each season went by. Mike Wolfe was no longer just a TV host, he was a brand. He started to like the idea of working on his own projects, and a former network executive said that there were even talks inside the company about giving him a new show that had nothing to do with Frank. When these rumors were brought up, Wolfe publicly denied them, but the seeds of suspicion had already been planted. What hurt Frank the most, according to sources, said it wasn't just the imbalance of fame, but also the silence. The way Mike quietly made decisions without him, changed scripts without him being involved, and scheduled meetings without his knowledge made him feel like his voice didn't matter anymore. The show had once been their shared vision, but now there was only one captain at the helm. Then there were the health problems. Years of stress from constant travel and bad habits hurt Frank's body. He had Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory bowel disease that made traveling difficult. When he left filming, it was supposed to be temporary. He would get better and come back, but that never happened. The official network statement said that Frank was on medical leave. Fans sent thousands of well wishes, and rumors of his return came up every few weeks. But behind the scenes, nothing happened. Frank didn't get any calls, and his name wasn't even mentioned in meetings. When he called the producers, he got vague answers. Then one day, the decision was made. He was fired, and his name was taken off of promotional materials and replaced with a new co-host. The show went on, and he was left in complete grief. Months later, in an emotional interview, Frank broke his silence and said that he hadn't talked to Mike in 2 years and that he felt abandoned with no contact while Mike was recovering. "They left me," he said. This statement shocked fans. How could the two men who had brought American pickers to millions of viewers for over a decade be so different? Why had Mike never talked about Frank's departure in public? Frank's health was getting worse. He became depressed from feeling betrayed and rejected by his friends. He stopped answering messages, rarely left the house, and his weight went up and down wildly. His health quickly got worse. Then he had a stroke. A neighbor who hadn't seen him in days found him unconscious at home in Davenport, Iowa, and he was rushed to the hospital and put straight into the intensive care unit ICU. At first, it looked like a sad medical emergency. A man in his 50s, who had been dealing with years of health problems, stress, and personal problems, finally died of a sudden and violent stroke. What people didn't know at the time, and what would later become the main point of a shocking criminal trial, was that Frank Fritz had tested positive for fentanyl. Not just traces of it, but a lethal dose. This wasn't a dose meant to help with pain. It was meant to that could stop breathing, paralyze the nervous system, and kill a person. But Frank wasn't known to use street drugs. He had been alone while he was recovering, so how did fentanyl get into his body? This question lingered for a while until Frank's death, at which point the coroner's office started to ask tough questions. These questions led to the decision to do a more thorough autopsy, looking at tissue samples, blood tests, and the toxicology report. Nothing was missed. The results were shocking. Frank had been exposed to a synthetic form of fentanyl that was 40 times stronger than heroin. He had not been prescribed this drug, nor did he keep it in his home, nor did he take it by mouth. Instead, he injected it. According to his family, Frank had always hated needles. They said that he only took medicine when it was absolutely necessary, but he never touched injectable drugs. Even getting a flu shot made him nervous, so the idea that he would willingly inject a deadly opioid was unthinkable to his sister. When a small puncture wound was found on his upper thigh, it was no longer an accident. It looked like he had been murdered. After his home was searched, Mike Wolfe was arrested without any media attention on charges of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. America's favorite picker's face looked tired and worn out. The smile was gone, and everything seemed to have lost its meaning. The wrinkles around his eyes showed that he was tired. He flatly denied the charges, saying that the evidence was only weak. But the court would soon make its final decision, because a fateful trial reveals the ultimate truth. When Frank died and the truth about the fentanyl was made public, Mike Wolfe was arrested and the historic trial began. Prosecutors relied heavily on this description during the trial, saying that Mike's need for control had turned into a twisted obsession to the point where he no longer saw Frank as a partner, but as an enemy. The prosecution called a clinical psychologist to testify and looked at Wall's behavior patterns based on interviews, witness statements, and the video footage that had been looked at. The psychologist said Wolfe had traits of narcissistic personality disorder, including arrogance, a lack of empathy, an obsession with control, and an insatiable need for admiration at any cost. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as audio recordings of Wolfe were played. In another email to a business partner, he said, "When this is completely mine, we can finally scale up without any hindrances." He wasn't talking about the show, he was talking about Frank. The prosecution built the case for murder as a cold, calculated business decision. It was the last step in a long chain of events meant to get rid of anything that stood in Mike's way and help him fully control his empire. Mike Wolfe's smile, his smile, which used to calm people down, help him close deals and make him millions of dollars, was gone. In its place was a man whose private thoughts, planned actions, and cruel goals had been made public in the worst way possible. Detectives followed the clues and found that Wolfe had filed legal papers to get sales rights over Frank's image and signature only 3 weeks after he died. He also asked his lawyer to change the ownership structure of Antique. The autopsy report showed a needle-like puncture wound on Frank's upper thigh, but it was hard to see because of his clothing. The location was strange and didn't fit with self-administered drug use, especially since Frank was still having trouble moving after his stroke. The fentanyl levels in his system proved that the dose was intentional and fatal. By the time Wall went to court to organize the evidence, truck footage, digital data, financial motives, and witnesses were all piling up. Testimonies, the coroner's findings, and most importantly Wolfe's silence when asked a question he refused to answer. He didn't say a word, get angry, or fight back. He just kept quiet, the same silence he had kept since Frank's death. The formal charges were read soon after: first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and illegally using the digital identity of a deceased person. Wolfe denied the charges in his first statement through his lawyer. The statement that said Mr. Wolfe loved Frank like a brother and is deeply distressed by Frank's death and is fully cooperating with the investigation was completely false. In court, the jury learned that Wall had started getting ready to take full control of the American Pickers brand in the year before Frank's death. He had restructured the businesses, renegotiated contracts with the History Channel, and took Frank's name off of everything. If Frank got sick or couldn't be reached, Wolfe's lawyers said these were normal business decisions that were made after Frank's health problems and his departure from the show. In an email sent 6 weeks before Frank's stroke, Wolfe told a business partner, "When this burden is resolved, we can expand clearly without delays with no looking back." Wall's plan to start his own separate, expanded brand under his own name just 3 weeks after Frank's death was shown in another email shared with the jury. Next was a timeline that showed Wolfe's custom black Mercedes Sprinter van was near Frank's house from 1:36 a.m. to 1:46 a.m. The prosecution said Wolfe used a short 10-minute window to inject a lethal dose of fentanyl, Finally, there was the emotional side of things, which was the basis of their case. They called Frank's sister, Marianne Fritz, to the stand. She spoke calmly but firmly, saying that Frank was devastated when he left the show, both physically and mentally. He felt betrayed and kept telling her, "Mike doesn't care, he just wants me to leave." The defense then showed the jury a note that Frank had written, "I know he will come for me. If anything happens, it won't be an accident." The jury was shocked, but it was Elaine Temple, Frank's neighbor, who really blew the prosecution's case wide open. That night I woke up and couldn't sleep. I looked out the window and saw the truck. I recognized it from TV. I saw someone get out and walk to the side door of Frank's house. He didn't knock. He just stood there, she said. When shown a lineup picture, Elaine pointed to Mike Wolfe. "I believe that was him," she said in court. "I can't swear to it, but it looked like him. The walk, the posture, everything." The defense tried to discredit her testimony by saying it was hard to see, the lighting, and her memory wasn't reliable, but the damage was already done. A chilling picture was being painted. The most emotional moment for the defense was when Mike Wolfe took the stand. His lawyer said it was a risky choice, but Mike Wolfe, he walked slowly to the witness chair, not the confident TV host America used to know. At first, his voice shook, but he soon calmed down. "We were like brothers," Mike said. "We built something together, but it got complicated. Reputation changes everything. Money changes people. Maybe I didn't handle it well. I never meant to hurt Frank." He read from the messages found on his phone. "Those messages were when I vented. I blew off steam. Work was frustrating. I said things I regret. None of that means I killed him. We had problems, but I would never hurt him because I couldn't live with myself." But those words couldn't sway the jury. The evidence against Mike Wolfe was just too strong. After weeks of deliberation in a courtroom that was so full, it felt like time had stopped. Hundreds of eyes were on the defendant, Mike Wolfe, who had once been a familiar face on TV, but was now standing there still like a statue. The cold light of the courtroom cast a shadow on his pale face. When the judge spoke, the suffocating silence was broken with a deep, commanding voice. "In this court, the defendant Michael Wolfe is found guilty." There was a soft gasp that shook the room like a cold wind running down the spines of those who were there. Everyone was looking at Mike Wolfe, waiting for him to do something, anything to show that he felt bad or angry. But he stood there, eyes seemingly empty, staring straight ahead without blinking. Then, in a moment that seemed like it would never end, a small change happened. He blinked slowly and heavily, as if trying to process an unbearable truth. Then he slowly fell to the floor, his face showing that he was helpless. His knees seemed to lose all strength, slowly giving way and lowering his huge body to the floor. Before anyone could react, Mike Wolfe had collapsed in the courtroom, and a heavy thud echoed through the still space like a final statement. He lay there motionless, his arms outstretched, his face down, and his salt and pepper hair tangled in the cold ground. The stone floor was cold at first, and it seemed like time had stopped. Then chaos broke out, with the sounds of chairs scraping against each other, rushing footsteps, and frantic calls. The court's medical staff, who are always ready for emergencies, rushed to Mike Wolfe's side and knelt next to him to start chest compressions right away, desperately trying to bring him back to life. An oxygen mask was quickly put on his face, but it looked like he was in a futile scene. Among the medical staff, where's the pulse, blood pressure, call an ambulance? But in the midst of the chaos, a cruel truth began to emerge. The man who had once been a symbol of finding and reviving lost treasures and building a TV empire from old items was now a tragic reminder of his own greed and cruelty. Mike Wolfe died right there in the courtroom, just after hearing the terrible verdict. News of his sudden and shocking death spread like wildfire. The world was shocked. How could a story that was once just a sensational tabloid headline turn into such a grim reality with such an almost unbelievably tragic ending? This was the question that millions of people who had watched Mike Wolfe's journey on American pickers were asking themselves as they watched this haunting and unexpected final chapter. Mike Wolfe's downfall wasn't just the fall of a person, but the fall of an era, a stark reminder of the price of fame and the corruption of power. The Frank Fritz case was a crushing blow to the global public's trust when the villain turned out to be Frank Fritz's close friend Mike Wolfe. Shock waves went around the world, but the most horrifying ending happened in courtroom when Mike Wolfe suddenly died, leaving a huge question mark about the secret that had not been told. But had the story really ended behind closed doors of the trial, or were there still details to be revealed? To make sure you don't miss any new developments and to dig deeper into the dark corners of the Frank Fritz case, find the missing clues and solve the case. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to get notifications. Because the truth can be even stranger than what we think it is.